Thank you, Professor Levak, and good afternoon, colleagues, and thank you so much for the invitation just to share some of our thoughts and learn with you colleagues around what's emerging as a very important mission of the university. Cornel, would you please share the PowerPoint presentation? And while Cornel is sharing, Prof. Levak, you'll also be happy to know that I'm also an alumnus of UWC many moons ago as well. So definitely very
You find themselves everywhere, Dr. Damons.
What you say, ma'am? What do you say?
I said UWC alumni find themselves everywhere.
Everywhere. So thank you so much, colleagues. We can move to the next slide. So when we engage with community engagement, we start recognizing through various sets of work that context matters. And what's emerging in our approach to the work is a recognition of almost a triple helix of marginalization, community marginalization. What we are tentatively terming pre-democracy marginalization, that is the structural and societal and cultural inequalities brought about during apartheid. The post-democracy marginalization, and I'm actually sitting in George myself and Ruby Ann, and we've just engaged with the George communities. We recognize almost the concept of the lost dream because of corruption, lack of service delivery, and people basically feeling totally disenfranchised because of a sense of not the ideal of a society where we all could flourish in not being met by a political dispensation. And the new form of marginalization, which we discover, is actually in-community marginalization, with our communities being extremely complex, faced with various challenges, social challenges, gangsterism, in our province, the impact of SMMEs that stifle growth in communities, development happening around certain individuals or entities. So it's within that type of contextual framing that we are really starting to think carefully on how we engage across various disciplines, across various themes with our communities. Next slide, please. So our strategy is, as I'm sure, is informed by as all colleagues' strategies are, by the both international, continental, national, and local imperatives. And our primary driver is Vision 2030. And that, you can move the slide, please, Cornel. And Vision 30 basically postulates at the apex is that we are repositioning ourselves to be in greater service of society. And I flag that proposition of as a bit of a tension that we experience while doing this work, because I think the posture is more with rather than of society, by then as a core outcome seeking to co-create a sustainably, socially just world. If you can move on to the next slide, please, Cornel. And so we think we are thinking carefully of how does this permeate into the operational structures of the university, especially an institution, as we put it, that is locally responsive and seeking to make continental and global impact. And so the key part of the engagement strategy is really understanding how do we facilitate successful intersection of the key strategic focus or core missions of the university, that being learning and teaching, research and innovation, and then now transformative engagement. And I think from our side, we've seen a very a strong political commitment, but through the establishment of a deputy vice chancellor portfolio called Engagement and Transformation that has two directorates, the one that I lead being engagement and the one that Ruby Ann leads, which is transformation. And so our work is really thinking carefully around how does these set of high level type of propositions, how are they actually demonstrated, informed by both intellectual and scholarly endeavors. We move. Next slide, please. And so I've spoken about, you can move to the next slide. I've spoken about the intersection of the core missions. And so this is where our proposition starts now in around strategy and thinking. So historically, we recognize that universities played a big service part in which they service very high level ended government and business entities in innovation, thinking carefully about different type of products and markets, exploring multiple markets to generate economies that should serve the bulk of society. And then on the other posture of the university, we had the idea that we had the solution, and communities would then receive solutions that we would develop within the walls of the university. But our new posture then is suggesting that we start moving to a more converged approach to engagement. You can move the slide, please. So the key organizing principles of our proposition around converged engagement is the first concept of convergence, is how do we get together to talk about the phenomena that seeks to provide a response to that particular phenomena or challenge faced by various stakeholder communities. And in that coming together, how are we recognizing the voice, the agency, and celebrating the group of stakeholder communities involved in that phenomena. The second organizing principle is the principle of solidaristic reciprocity. And that is a posture which says that given historical and contemporary inequalities faced, there should be an expectation that those that have more should give more, including institutions of higher learning. However, there has to be a recognition that everyone at the table has something to offer. So whether it is your Fortune 500 company, or whether it's a gogo in Elsie's River that's living in a back dwelling, that the fact that she's at the table, that she made time, that she's willing to think carefully, she must be regarded as a reciprocal act in its very nature. And then the final organizing principle is multiple forms of output. Because historically, we must understand that we understand that universities have been led by its primary mission, and that is to produce forms of knowledge that are supposed to advance others. And those knowledges were normally located in scholarly outputs. But what we suggest with this, with the third organizing principle, is that we really have to think of all the outputs that emerge, which could include scholarly outputs that make us, that help us think carefully about this work. Because this principle suggests that socially useful scholarship is actually generated when we actually do the work, not only when we think about the work. We can move on. So so our approach that we then follow is, and we are obviously there's a lot of critique, because the sense that some colleagues in the space have is that we cannot organize our way. It seems quite chaotic for them, and that's why we find a bit of resistance. But now, because of bodies of knowledge that have been emerging from all of us, and including all the institutions, now we are in a position, I think at Mandela University as well, to start suggesting a very clear process towards co-constructing solutions that can create spaces for strong multidiscipline type of collaboration. So there are four key moments in our approach. The one is the initiating moment. The second one is then the multi-stakeholder collaboration. The third is probably the most intensive moment. That is where the work is actually being done. And the fourth is in the project consolidation workshop to analyze and look at the lessons that have emerged through the processes. But these are not static. Although the diagram might look very static, they are very dynamic. We say it's linear, it's iterative, it's all over the show, and it's extremely complex because of the focus of the engagement, with at its core being a critical, and critical is important for the methodology, participatory action approach, with a term that we learned from Kenya called epistemic humility. Epistemic humility being understood that we are entering this discourses of knowledge production in a way that does not seem to exclude any knowledge, but to give strength to the knowledges that's emerging through the different sets of work that we are engaged in. You can move to the next slide. And so we've just completed a reworked version of a short learning program, inviting various internal and external stakeholders who are interested in doing the work in this way to work with us through this SLP that has been constructed over many years and in collaboration with a number of the colleagues, some of them who are in the space. And the two key components.
Dr. Damons, you have 2 minutes left.
Right, I'm rushing to wrap up now, man. Okay.
No worries.
Yeah, the two key components here is the top part is relationship building, and the second part is actually when we do the project work. We can move on to the next slide. We can move on. And so some of the key lessons that we have learned, so just go back to this, is I'll possibly highlight two that actually merge in our George conversation now with the community members in George, is the notion of the importance of establishing proper, meaningful, humanizing relations with all stakeholders with whom we engage. Our approach is time consuming, although demands are against doing meaningful work because of the time constraints that are set up by very internal as well as external factors. And the key one then, and the final one, which I will conclude with, Prof. Levak, is this notion of the type of language that we use when we engage with communities, because communities feel there's always an expectation that we should bring language to the level, or they should engage with us at the level that we feel comfortable in understanding. The idea is, how do we start flipping those discourses and start developing new languages of engagement that is meaningful both to communities as well as the university itself as well. Thank you so much.
Great. So I think because you had mentioned that there's going to be international colleagues as well, I thought that I would maybe just frame transformation within the South African higher education context, that there had been a transformation barometer that was adopted by the sector in 2015. And that specific barometer identified key dimensions, themes, and sub-themes that then informed the transformation agenda across the sector. I'm not going to go into each one, but just to say that the Nelson Mandela University adopted the transformation barometer, and you will see that in terms of our institutional transformation plans, we are currently busy with our second transformation plans, 5-year plans. So our first one was from 2017 to 2022, and the second one is now 2023 to 2027. You will see that the key dimensions basically reflects the dimensions as reflected within the transformation barometer. So in terms of the, I'm just going to continue, findings from the state of transformation in higher education institutions. This is a report that was released early on this year. I'm going to use this as just in terms of the dimensions that, or the themes that emerge from it based on the annual reports of the 26 institutions. Looking at the transformation approach being a culture of innovation as opposed to a culture of compliance, and then looking at the focus of equity versus development. There were 4 typologies of higher education institutions that emerged. The first type being focused on equity within a strong improvement culture, so a developmental culture. The second type was focused on relevance within a strong improvement culture. The third type was focused on equity, and that was compliance driven. And the fourth one was focused on relevance, but still compliance culture. So in terms of the actual, I would say the continuum of where we are at as public higher education institutions, they found that about half or 50% of institutions were still very much focused on equity, right, where it was driven by a compliance culture, which was quite shocking, to be quite honest with you. 13 out of the 26 institutions were compliance driven and focusing on redress in terms of equity. Then there were the other 50% was diversity focused with an improvement culture or development culture, and the other 5, so it's very few that actually aligns in my understanding of what a university's purpose is to be relevant within a strong improvement culture, so a developmentally orientated institution. And so as it says here, the sweet spot is actually between those two, diversity focused and developmentally engaged institution. So in terms of our priorities at Nelson Mandela University, those are the listed ones. So there are 6 priority areas, and you'll see that it actually spans across all areas, both core as well as support in terms of change. So transformation is not only about equity, it's also about its relevance to contributing towards an equal, just society. And so when we look at our institutions then, when our new staff comes on board, when our students comes on board, when our communities come into our spaces, are they truly welcome? So the institutional culture and how we do things, the unwritten rules, are they flexible and responsive enough? And I'm using those terms specifically because as higher education institutions, we've got lots of policies, and regulatory frameworks, but in terms of its flexibility or agility to take on new ways of doing things, new ways of engaging, as Bruce had said earlier on, we found that to be quite inflexible. And so it sort of opens up new ways of engaging and even challenging. And that is observations that I'm going to share a little bit later on. So as I've said, 6 areas of transformation. And then in terms of implementation and monitoring, so this change that you are talking about, the impactfulness of the change, how is that reported on? How is that measured within the system? So as I've said, we are currently in our 2nd institutional transformation plan. This, and I'm not sure, what I found is that it's not necessarily, I won't say ubiquitous, but it's not uniform across all institutions. Some are still developing their first plan, whereas this has been an element that should have been implemented or at least approved by council way back in 2017. So anyway, besides that, there is this unequal reporting on it at sectoral level, and then obviously also within the institution. So who actually oversees the implementation of the ITP? That's council, your most senior structure, and then also in terms of the Higher Education Act, you also have a statutory structure called the Institutional Forum, and that also, we find that that is challenging in terms of the level of activity of institutional fora across the sector. Then in terms of at committee level, how does that structure then look? How do you get reporting into the system? So we do have an engagement and transformation committee. And so I think when Bruce earlier on said that we've got a unique way portfolio in that we have put together engagement and transformation because we are seeing engagement as a driving force in terms of the transformation that happens both internally and externally to the institution.
You have 2 minutes left, Ruby.
Oh, Okay, so with regards to the monitoring and evaluation of this transformation, we do have a strategic plan, and we are integrating both quantitative and qualitative indicators that shows transformation within the system. And I know also that Bruce is working on a M&E framework that will also try and quantify the developmental or sustainable development change that happens. And reporting, there's statutory reporting as well. So this is just observations that I just want to share. So in terms of the spaces that we have opened up in terms of the new way or the revised way of engaging with our communities, it has actually opened up access not only for our communities to come into the institution, but also for us to access resources within our communities. So that solidaristic reciprocity is a key element that has been embedded in the way that we interface. Also, increased visibility of the university within our communities, and then also more community members coming onto our university property so that they can access whatever resources there are. As I've indicated earlier on, because this is a different way in which we are creating relationships, the usual format of relationship or let's say agreements was MOUs or partnerships, right? So we have actually come, up against challenges in terms of the lack of identity of specific types of partnerships that's not reflected in our policy framework, or types of transactions, that the let's say financial system does not necessarily accommodate because of the types of relationalities that are being built between the university and the communities. Also, the discourses and the languaging is changing because this is flowing back into the institution. And then obviously because of the transdisciplinarity of my last point, the transdisciplinarity of projects that are identified through the discourses is breaking down silos that used to occur within the institution. So people from humanities are speaking to people from the sciences, and they're coming together to collectively with our communities, come up with co-created solutions. So yeah, I think that is it from my side, just in terms of observations around how we have revisioned engagement projects. Thanks so much, Chair.
Thank you.